The commandment today is honor your father and your mother. Decalogue 4 for me is the most uncomfortable of the series to watch. It flirts with the idea of incest, but possibly not incest at the same time. Either way, watching a young woman attempt to seduce the man who raised her makes for prime awkward viewing material. It opens up with Anka, a 20-year-old drama student, waking up her single father Michal by pouring water on his head. He then chases her down and splashes her with water in a playful revenge. The phone rings and Anka takes it in the other room after asking her father not to listen into the call. He still does, and hears her tell her boyfriend Yarek that she got her period. Michal lowers the phone in disappointment or jealousy or a mix of emotions. As with the other Decalogue episodes, Kieślowski allows the first scene to work as a thesis for the rest of the episode. Immediately, we see the relationship between Michal and Anka is closer than a normal father-daughter relationship, possibly due to the mother's absence. In a moment that is a bit on the nose, a nurse tests Anka's eyesight, and the letters she chooses spell out father. Maybe for Polish audiences this isn't on the nose, but it is for us Anglos. The spelling out of father serves as a dual purpose, adding to the overall theme of the episode, but it also highlights how westernized Anka is. She can speak English, unlike many Poles. She also dresses in the Western fashion of the 80s, and her bedroom is literally a giant Winston cigarette ad. Just from my friends' perspectives, who had family that lived in the Soviet Union, the West was often seen as a place of both commercialism and sexual liberation, whereas Poland and Russia were generally much more conservative when it came to their sexual politics. So for a Polish viewer, it might not be that shocking to them that Anka would try to pursue a taboo sexual relationship. After Michal leaves on a business trip, Anka finds a letter that states, "To be opened after my death." She examines it against a light and sees that there's another envelope inside it. It intrigues her. She takes the letter to the lakeside and extracts the inner envelope. It's from her mother, addressed to her. Whatever is inside is important and most likely life-changing. She contemplates reading it, but Artur Barkish, now a rowboater, stares at her as he carries the boat from the water's edge to the forest. She decides not to read it. The next scene sums up her character dilemma quite nicely. Her acting teacher instructs her as she performs an intimate scene with her boyfriend. She starts the scene standing, but the teacher soon has her lay on top of him and tenderly speak. But she doesn't impress the teacher. She's not looking at her boyfriend with the right look. Something is missing between the two of them. When the teacher grabs her, though, and forces her to look into his eyes, she gives him the look that she needed to give to her boyfriend. It's a super well-composed shot, showing how she's in between a man her age and a sort of father figure, while rejecting the younger man in favor of the older one. I also want to bring up that she needed a reason to love him. And obviously there are more reasons to love the older man, the instructor, than there are the student. So she goes back to the apartment and forges the letter from her mother. Then, in typical drama student fashion, she recites the fake letter to her father as a dramatic monologue the minute he greets her after arriving back in town, declaring that he is not her father. He slaps her and walks away in a huff. Everything has changed. Kieślowski keeps us guessing, though. We know that she looks like her mother. From a very simplistic perspective, one can gather that this is reason for Michal possibly developing romantic feelings towards Anka. We know that that's not really the case, though. I think it's a clever trick by Kieślowski. If Anka looks like her mother, then we don't know who the real father is. It could be anyone, because it's not readily apparent in her appearance. Okay, now we're in the meat of the episode. The interesting thing about this episode is that it's almost completely comprised of intimate scenes between Anka and Michal for the remainder of the episode. It's also when the episode gets fairly uncomfortable to watch. One of the first scenes is a discussion in the elevator of the building, where the doctor from Dekalog 2, Alexander Bardini, awkwardly interrupts their conversation. Michal takes Anka down to the basement to show her a photo of the two men who are most likely her father. He confesses that he knew that he was probably not the father. I'm going to return to the scene a little later, but for now, I'll leave it as they are now on an even playing field, having both confessed to not being bloodkin, even if they're not 100% sure about it. Before that scene, Anka tells her boyfriend's mom that she wants to marry him. Her boyfriend is clueless about the situation, and we can guess that the reason for this declaration is that she's scared of her real feelings for her father. She expresses these feelings explicitly later on, stating that when she is with a boy, when she has sex with a boy, she feels like she's cheating on him. I just want to point out that at this point, she's now openly talking about her sex life to her dad, contrasting the beginning where she at least tried to hide it. Her love for him reaches a point of obsession, and Janusz Gajos, and I hope I said that name right, who plays as Michał, does an excellent job of a father in the process of losing his only daughter. I don't think it's a coincidence that they ran into the doctor from Dekalog too, as he is a man who lost his children. Michał is a man who's losing his child, and he plays a character with an incredibly somber intensity. You see the melancholy and grief so clearly in his face. Everything that she does pains him. I want to point out one scene in particular. It's the scene where they engage in Bruderschaft, which is a practice we don't really do here in the States. It's where you wrap your arm around another person's and you take a drink. Often they'll say something like, "Let's get on a first name basis." And after you drink, you formally or informally, I guess, introduce yourselves. Between men, it's a sign of the beginning of a friendship. Between a man and a woman, it's more flirtatious. In the case of Anka and Michał, it plays an interesting role. For one, Anka is openly flirting with her father by proposing it, and the fact that he plays along tells her that he's open up to the idea of a new kind of relationship. But after they do it, Anka states her name, but her father stays silent. The practice implies a new relationship between the two, not as father and daughter, but just as Michał and Anka, equals. In this new space, it's not taboo for them to pursue a sexual relationship, at least in Anka's eyes. And Anka reveals in these conversations that she has always had at least a semi-sexual attraction to Michał. She talks about liking when he stroked her naked back as a child. Michał, on the other hand, did everything he could as a father to keep her young, even bringing her to the mountains when she got her first period in some weird attempt to delay her puberty. So then, she exposes herself to him. And shortly afterward, he covers her and then strokes her naked back, like he used to when she was a child. This moment was his time to decide how the relationship moved forward, and he assumed the role of the father, even if she might not have been his biological child. They wish to go back in time, but that can never be so. He reveals that he always intended for her to read that letter, but he couldn't bring himself to have her do so. He knew that it contained something that would alter their relationship, at least in her eyes. But this last time that he left on his trip, he left the letter behind so that she would read it. Leaving the letter behind in hopes that she would read it signifies a letting go of her, an acknowledgement that she is now an adult and is possibly an impetus for her to move out. He said not much earlier that he had hoped that something irreversible, like a pregnancy, would have happened to her. So it's not crazy to think that he wanted this new information to push her out of the nest. Except, she never read the letter, as we all know. The next day, she runs down into the courtyard of the apartment block and confesses this fact to her dad. What's interesting is that Artur Barkish, with his rowboat from earlier, passes by her yet again as she confesses the real truth. They decide to burn the letter, but not all of it burns. From the fragment remaining, we can guess that the revelation by Anka's late mother is that Michał is not her father, but we don't know for sure. And that doesn't really matter in the end. I want to go back to the candle scene in the basement before this video ends. Kieślowski shoots both Michał and Anka through the candles, with the flames occupying the foreground. He shoots the burning of the envelope in a similar way. What's interesting is that in the first case, he associates the flames with Michał's confession to Anka that she may not be his child, and in the second case, Anka's confession to her father that she will disregard the letter to remain his child. Decalogue 4 intimately explores love and its boundaries. In schools, we're taught that there are three types of love: amore, agape, and eros. But we know that there aren't necessarily hard categories, as they often merge and the lines between them blur. What kind of love is appropriate between a father and daughter, and does their blood relation change that dynamic? How do we put borders on our love for other people? And what really is the metric for where we draw the lines? Kieślowski doesn't answer these questions in 4, but more so just illustrates one example of two people restructuring their relationship in the wake of new information. And to tie it all back to the commandment, here's a funny thing that I'm not the first to point out. In order to honor her father, Anka must disrespect her mother's wishes.
Żółtej koperty.
Proste jak cholera.
Myślałem, że nic się między nami nie zmieni.
Chyba kłamiesz. Kłamiesz.